Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name's Radha Priti, and I'm here with a family of seekers, and we're reading through the Bhagavad Gita, taking its nectar and trying to apply it to our lives. And we are on chapter 4 today. Chapter 4, we're going to start with text 16. This chapter is called Transcendental Knowledge. So the knowledge of knowing the supreme position of God and our relationship with Him. And this chapter tells us just how powerful that knowledge can be in our lives. So it's kind of amazing. And those of us that have, been here for a little bit and been kind of practicing some of these things have tried some of this on and have seen the effects of this. So we're not here just like, kind of blind faith. We're here kind of in an experimental mode, like trying these things that we learn and seeing how they impact our lives and building faith in that way. And it's a beautiful thing that we do here together. So thank you all for joining, coming at 7:30 in the morning. And if you ever want to join us, you can email me at seekersquest108@gmail.com and I will send you the links. So today we're going to do 4 verses, 16 through 19. Who wants to volunteer to help read today? Let me put your hand up. Leonie and Mariah, wonderful. Okay, great. So do you guys just want to take turns? We can start with Leonie and then there's 4 of them. Okay, let's do that. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to start with chapter 4, 16. Whenever you're ready,
E-
Leonie.
Even the intelligent are bewildered in determinant. I don't know how to say it. What is
Determining. Uh-huh.
action? Yeah, what is action and what is inaction? Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all misfortune.
Wonderful. Okay, so the next few verses can be the next like 16 through 18 can be a little bit confusing because there's quite a play of words related to the word karma, which is when we see action is it's translated as in Sanskrit as karma. So we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit, the different meanings of karma and how we should understand it in this context. But if the words get a little bit confusing to you, just try to hold on to the concepts and the principles that we're talking about because it's kind of a funny thing. Some of these Sanskrit words can have multiple meanings. Like the word karma, it's related to the worldview of karma, which we all know what that is, what that worldview is that for every action there's a reaction, and so within that worldview, that word is used a lot to kind of talk about different things, and so it can be a little bit confusing if you're not so familiar with that the context and how these things are talked about. So we'll try to unpack it a little bit so it makes more sense. So here Krishna is saying, I will tell you why even the wise are bewildered between action, which is karma, this word karma, and inaction, which in Sanskrit, this word is akarma. So between action and inaction, I will tell you why even the wise are bewildered. So these words don't mean the same thing. Action and inaction here don't mean the same thing that we're used to. It's not talking about things that are in motion or not in motion. Right? When we say action, when action is used in this verse, karma, it refers to action that causes bondage to the material world, like we've talked about. And when you're bound to the material world, then you're subjected to this law of karma. And we've talked a lot about how we can transcend, right, to the transcendental level where we're not bound by this law of karma. So that's what he's talking about here. And inaction is translated as akarma, right? That refers to action that doesn't cause bondage. So if we kind of reread that and put that in, think about those meanings. It says even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action. So things that will bind you to this world, and what is inaction, things that won't bind you to this world. And then he says, now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated. So that's kind of the broad definition of those words and how they're used in this context. And so he's saying the wise want to know the difference between these two words. So when we talk about action or karma, it's action done in line with our prescribed duties. So it's when we're acting in line with our duty. We talked a lot about that when we're acting in line with our dharma, when we're acting in line with scriptural injunctions, right? It's good, this is we'll get good karma, but it's work that causes bondage. Like we talked about that word karma kanda. I don't know if you guys remember that. We talked about kind of that transactional relationship with God, like, okay, I'll do this and then you'll give me this. So that's like it's good in one sense that you're working in line with your prescribed duties, but you're still bound by the material world and the laws of karma and the modes of nature because you're still kind of trying to be your own controller. You're still kind of deciding what you want and what you don't want and kind of engaging in this transactional relationship with God in that way. So you generate material reactions, either good or bad, depending on, what your motive is and what you're doing. And this keeps the soul bound in the cycle of birth and death, this samsara. So an example would be like a person who works very honestly, does their duty, and gives to charity, but they still maybe desire recognition or material rewards. They're still very driven by themselves and their ego. And and in that they stay bound. So that's when we talk about action or karma, action, karma. Again, it's action done in line with prescribed duties. So what you're doing is good, but your motive is not quite there yet. So then when we talk about inaction, akarma, that's work that doesn't cause bondage, right? This leads to liberation beyond material consequences. And it's the only way to break free from karma completely. When we say karma here, this cycle of birth and karma, this cycle of reaction and action for reaction, right? And so he's going to teach us what this is, how to do this. And he's saying the wise want to know the difference between these two. So this is what Krishna is talking about. And he's going to tell us. It's because this knowledge of a karma will free us from the cycle of birth and death. We had a few new people just come on. Lisa, it's wonderful to have you back. Welcome. Happy you're here.
Good morning. So wonderful to be here.
It's great. And Andrew and Twinkle, welcome. Good to have you here. Okay, so from there, we're going to move on to 17. I'll share my screen. And if Narayani wants to read 17.
Right. I did not sign up for the reading because I'm actually working.
Oh, sorry. Who was it? Oh, Mariah. Sorry.
All right. The intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is.
Okay. So what he's saying here is the complexity of karma is difficult to understand. So again, we talked about the different meanings of karma. There's 4 different meanings of karma. It can mean activity, which is what we just talked about, right? It can mean this universal justice system, which is that for every action, there's a reaction, right? We can talk about karma as like the results that come to us, like, oh, that's my karma. I got that. Or destiny. So we don't need to get too caught up, but just the point is that there's multiple meanings of karma. And when you hear it, we kind of really need to understand the context to understand what's being said here. So when we're talking about now is the principle of karma, that we're accountable for our actions, right? The actions have consequences. What we do matters. So we should be careful about what we do. Right. And so he's saying the intricacies of action are very hard to understand. So how the system works, how we're given our reactions for our actions is difficult to understand. Because people often act with different motivations, right? Different motivations, desires, attachments. And that makes it difficult to know when they're doing the right thing or not, because the action could look the same on the outside, but is it for the right reasons? And in that way, there's like layers of karmic reactions, right? So the complexity arises because actions, they can produce both good, bad, and mixed results, right? Whatever you're doing, depending on what you're doing, the content, the context, why you're doing it, it can produce all different kinds of karmic results, right? And then understanding how they connect to the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth requires deep wisdom. So the question here is, how are we exactly accountable to our actions, right? Which actions are we accountable for? And Krishna is going to answer that. And in the last verse, we talked about karma. So in terms of the definition of when we perform our prescribed actions, when we're doing work in line with our dharma, so it's activities, it's like good activities. And then we talked about akarma. And akarma being when we're doing work that has no material results, right? When we transcend that cycle of birth and death and the laws of karma, right? We're going to learn a new term here that's called vikarma, which is bad results. So when we do things that aren't in line with our dharma or spiritual or scriptural injunctions. So we'll go through those a little bit in a little bit more detail so that we can really kind of hammer those in. So again, when we talk about karma, prescribed actions with results, it refers to action performed in the material world. Again, it can generate good or bad karma depending on the nature of the action. And it's again associated with attachment to results, right? When we know what we want and we're attached to it, right? And this is what creates the binding effect on the soul, keeping us entangled in the cycle of birth and death. And the action is typically performed because we have some personal outcome or reward that's in our mind that we want, right? It's very like me-centered. It's very kind of ego-centered. And the results of the action, again, can be positive or negative, leading to further karma. So an example, like a person works hard to make money because they desire success, recognition, or wealth. What they're doing isn't necessarily bad, but their desire, their motive is still very me-centered. And it's still very ego-centered. And that's karma. Their activity is karma. This activity is karma. And the outcome will bind the person to the material world. If you're desiring, we know this, if you're desiring success, recognition, or wealth, you'll keep desiring success, recognition, or wealth, regardless of how much you get. Right? And that generates further reactions like that. Another example is like a student studying hard to get good grades. Again, that's a good thing. That's in line with prescribed duties. That's a good thing. But they're doing it to get good grades. They have a specific result in mind, right? They want approval. They want success. Again, not bad, but going to bind them to the material world. And karma, this action, it's driven by the modes of material nature. We talked all about that in some past classes. The modes being the mode of goodness, the mode of passion, the mode of ignorance, right? And when you're subjected to those modes, they kind of control you, right? When we're in this cycle, this is how we're controlled by these modes of material nature. And they lead to the accumulation of material results. Okay, so this new term that we're learning called vikarma, right? This refers to actions that we shouldn't do, that are just bad, that are sinful. Sinful meaning creating space between us and God. They're against dharma. They're not the right thing to do. They result in negative karma, and they absolutely lead to further bondage in the material world, right? It leads to unwanted results. They often cause harm to ourselves or others. It involves actions that are unethical or harmful, and it creates bad karma. And it's typically driven by greed, anger, selfishness, ignorance, things that are really in that lower mode. So an example here would be like dishonesty in business, like lying, cheating, stealing, or harming others, breaking promises, or engaging in immoral behavior, right? All of these things. So then this other term that we already talked about, akarma, this is where there's no material results, right? Akarma. So we had karma, vikarma, akarma. Akarma refers to actions that doesn't create any binding results or karmic reactions because it's done with detachment, selflessness, and without personal desires for outcomes. So this is a person that we've been talking about a lot, this system of karma yoga, which again is a different kind of context for the word karma, but karma yoga is working with detachment, right? We're just dedicating the fruits of what we do to God. We're detached. And in that, we that's how we are not bound. That's how we become unbound. And these actions that we're doing, they're akarma. They yield no material results. It's an act of selfless service, right? And therefore it frees us. So examples here, offering food to God, performing our work, our duty with a sense of service to God, and offering the results to God without being attached to the outcome. That these are things that are done in akarma. And this is when he says in action, this is what he's meaning. This is what Krishna is meaning. So Krishna is saying that which action will lead to what reaction, and what action will keep us free from reaction is difficult to understand because it involves, again, our motivation, the content of the action, the context. And that's really what we're getting from this verse. He's saying the intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. And so that's what we just defined here, what those three things are. What action is karma, what inaction is akarma, and what forbidden action is vikarma. So we kind of differentiated what those are. And now we're going to talk about them further in the next verse, in verse 18. Does anybody want to share anything, or is this clear to you all so far?
Well, I was having a question on that, if that's okay.
Please.
Because if someone says, like, I'm doing this for Krishna, but it's not really a nice action, how do you see that?
So are you talking about like if somebody is kind of confused about their intentions and they're maybe saying, I'm doing this, but I'm doing this for one reason, but really they're probably a little bit confused with what their actual intentions are?
No, I'm actually meaning, like, if someone says, like, you should do this because this is what Krishna wants, but it's not really a nice action, then I get confused. I'm like, is this the good thing or the bad thing?
Yeah. So for that, again, we talked about this concept so many times. This is why we have Guru, Sadhu, Sastra, because it can be really hard to figure out what actually is in line with God's will. And sometimes what we think is in line with God's will is actually really just kind of a perverted reflection of our will. And so this is why it's so important to have like these trusted teachers in our lives that we can go to and say, this is what I'm feeling. Does this sound, in line with you? Does this sound right to you? Or is this just me placing my own stuff on where I think I should go or not? And so that's our guru, our teachers. And then sadhus, saintly association, people that are trying to do the same thing. And then the scriptures. Everything should be in line with the scriptures, with sastra, that's been around for millennia. So we definitely need to check ourselves. And then on the other hand, if this is other people doing things, that we kind of question, they might claim that it's in line, that this is what God wants, but we kind of question, it's best to try not to judge others, even if we think we know better, unless we're in a position where, we're kind of responsible for them, like they're our student or our child, or, because we don't really know. And also our judgment in itself will create karmic reactions for ourselves. So best just to kind of give people the benefit of the doubt and stay in our lane. Unless, they're causing real damage to people. And in that, maybe there's some kind of authority that you can speak to about it that can maybe address the situation, or, everything's unique like that. But does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Any questions?
I do.
Oh, please.
Okay. I'm trying to help my sister. She's turning 80 this year and she has dementia and she doesn't know what she's doing. And her sons are helping her a lot. And so I'm trying to work with her sons a lot to be able to help her and help alleviate her situation. So me and her sons are don't see eye to eye politically, so we just don't discuss it. But a couple days ago, I was just so overcome that I posted on Facebook my views, and I'm not sure if it was a good thing to do because it might hurt my relations with my nephews and thereby my sister. But I felt like I had to, so I'm a little mixed feelings on that one. Karmic
Yeah.
reactions.
Yeah, and I guess that for these kinds of things, sometimes it takes a lot of like deep reflection within ourselves. Like, why did I actually do that? Like what is my actual motive? Am I trying to be helpful? Am I trying to make a point am I serving my ego by trying to make a point that actually wouldn't really help anybody? um, what is our motive in what we're doing? And sometimes that takes a lot of deep prayer, contemplation, journaling, maybe talking to a close friend or a teacher. And to the degree that we're sincere and we can really confront that reality is to the degree that we can try to, that our karma will be improved for us. If we keep kind of acting in ways that we can't own up to our real motivation, then we're not only going to be stuck in this cycle of karmic reaction, but our consciousness is going to degrade. So whatever we're doing, it's so important to really understand why we're doing it. And then at least we can make the decision, okay, this is my motive. Is this in line with, who I am and who I want to be? I could tell you one time, I just gave this example at a talk I was giving. When I was working, this guy who was really difficult to work with, just just a kind of a mean old man, to be honest. He wrote this email about some work that I had done or something, and he was just like really rude and pointed, and there was like no reason to talk the way that he was talking, but he just takes that, because he can. And so I read this and I start firing an email back, and I'm like so fired up about how rude he was that just I'm like, I'm gonna crush everything that you said and I'm gonna make you feel like the idiot that you are. That was basically where what my mindset was. And I'm like halfway through this email and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, is this really going to make me feel better? I'm just trying to hurt this other person because he hurt me, which it's like, is that going to uplift me? Like, what is the point of doing this? So I really had to kind of like step back, confront my motivations and say, okay, what is my motivation? Okay, my motivation is to be clear about my position, to respect myself and also respect him, and to get the work done, and in a way that I feel is like the best product that can be. So what action can I do now that is in line with those actual motivations? And then it was like, okay, I don't even need to address where he is. I could just present it. I don't even need to address, I guess, I mean, I don't need to go back at him and be a jerk to him. I can just say, actually, this is my position. This is why I did this, you know, and send it. And I felt so like clean after I did that. It's like, okay, I don't have to take on his dirty laundry. Like he's got all this and he just projects it out to everybody else. I don't have to take that on and wear it. He could keep that. And so I felt good. And then actually what ended up happening is I was wrong. So I would have felt really stupid if I would have just been right back up at him and been, I was wrong, but he told me in a really mean way, which wasn't necessary. Um, but anyway, so then I could just take, and then I could wash my hands of it, So sometimes it really takes that, if we're doing something that we kind of feel is like a little bit off or we feel a little bit like gunky about, we really kind of have to step back, take personal responsibility and say, what am I doing here? Why am I doing it? And what, and does that align with my dharma, with what I know is right, and the kind of person that I want to be and the kind of values that I want to represent and reflect, And if not, that's fine, no problem. Then maybe choose something that is. Does that make sense? Yeah, because I think it can be confusing for all of us sometimes, our motives, sometimes, because most of the time our motives are mixed. It's not always black and white. Most of the time it's not black and white. But if we can kind of push ourselves that extra, give ourselves a little extra push to say, because all I really wanted to do in that moment was yell at this guy and make him feel like the idiot that he made me feel like. But if we can get ourselves out of that, we will be stronger and better because of it. We'll upgrade our consciousness. And then the next time that this comes up, it'll be easy to stay out of it. It'll be easy to not insert ourselves into things that like we don't need to take on. We can let other people keep their dirtiness.
I feel really good about what I did.
Oh, okay, good.
I'm just hoping that it doesn't interfere with me taking my sister to Costco so she can get the cookies she likes.
Can I ask you why you did what you did?
Yeah, I felt very strongly that this brave, courageous man who needs the help of the world was being hurt. And I wanted to stand up for him. And I would do it again and again because I believe with my whole heart and soul that it's right to do that.
Great. So yeah, and the only thing I would say to that is wherever you are and whatever your position is, if you have a trusted friend or a teacher or somebody to check, yourself with, that can only be more helpful. And I'm not saying one way or the other, because a trusted friend or a teacher will understand and will know and will be able to give you that real feedback. And to the degree that we're really sincere, we want that help. To the degree that we're really sincere, we know that, okay, sometimes I could be a little biased. Sometimes I don't know so much. I want this feedback. And that doesn't mean that we always have to accept it either, but we should be so sincere that we're seeking it and we're so open because we really want to understand how our actions are aligning with our intention and how our intention is aligning with our dharma. And that's what we're like primarily committed to. So we're very open and we're committed to that. Does that make sense? Great question, though. Thank you. And thank you for your vulnerability. Does anybody else want to share? Okay, great. Let's go to the next verse. And I think this is Leonie for 18.
One who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is intelligent among men, and he is in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities.
Great. Okay, so this is another little confusing one, again, because of all this play on words. So we're going to decode this a little bit so it makes a little bit more sense. So he says action and inaction, and inaction in action. Such a person is wise and will stay unbound even if engaged. So that's what he's saying here. And just to reorientate ourselves here, this section, text 16 through 24, Krishna is talking about karma yoga. We're still in this karma yoga section, how to work in a way that doesn't bind us. Right. And then the previous verse, he said that I will explain to you the knowledge by which you will be free from bondage. That's what he says. I will explain to you the knowledge by which you will be free from bondage. So now when we go back to this word akarma, which we talked about as being work that doesn't bind you, it can have two meanings. It can literally mean inactivity. And then the second is the meaning we already talked about, the action that doesn't cause a reaction or bondage. Right? So first, when he says, one who sees inaction in action. Inaction in action means externally acting, but not being bound. So it's a person who sees that a person is externally acting, but they understand that they're not bound. This is a wise person. There will be no karmic reaction when one does the right action. So for Arjuna, there'll be no negative reactions if he does his duty of fighting in the mood of detachment, right? And selfless service. So this means that understanding that true action, it's not just about physical activity. Right? A person who is practicing karma yoga or selfless action performs their duties without attachment to the results. And so even though they're physically engaged in activities, they are detached from the material outcomes. So such a person is not bound by the reaction of their actions because their intent is pure. It is aligned with their duty, with their dharma, and it's not driven by personal desire. So it's action because they're acting externally. It's inaction because a person isn't attached and therefore not bound by what they're doing. An example we could maybe relate to is like a police officer who is in a situation where he has to shoot somebody, and this is because this person is this is needed for like defense, right? Normally a person would be bound by this, but if the criminal's like on a violent spree and not stopping and the police has to shoot, then that shooting wouldn't incriminate the police, right? Because the police officer, he's not doing it for like his own selfish action. He's doing it for the bigger cause, right? He's performing it. He's not personally attached to the results of it for a personal reason. He's doing it, again, for a greater cause than just himself. And because he's not acting out of desire for personal gain or ego, he's not bound by the physical activity. Even though they're performing a physical action, he's detached from the outcome. He's not personally attached to whether that person lives or dies. He's trying to do his job. He's trying to do his duty. He's trying to protect citizens. And in that way, he's detached. So this action can be considered an action because it doesn't bind him to his material consequence. It's done as a part of duty. That's why he's doing it. So in the context of the Gita, this aligns with understanding inaction and action, because even though there's an external action, it is done without the binding effect of a personal desire or attachment. And therefore, the true self, the soul, is unaffected by this action, as it is in accordance with Dharma and is done without selfish motivation. So when we talk about action, inaction, again, this is like these words can make that kind of confusing. So I really just want to break down the essence and the principles of what's being spoken here. Action and inaction means that externally it appears that we're inactive, so it doesn't look like we're doing anything. Well, actually, we're still getting karmically entangled. So this is like if somebody has a duty, a dharma that they neglect, and they neglect it because of their own attachments or their own personal desires or whatever that be. And in that way, they're getting karmically entangled from not doing their duty. Right? So the wise understand that there will be reactions even when one does nothing in this sense. So here, akarma refers to the kind of inaction that involves an unethical or even criminal abandonment of one's duties. Right? So like if Arjuna neglects his duty as a martial guardian of society, he'll get bad karmic reactions. So this means that inaction or failing to fulfill one's duty still results in some consequences. So someone who avoids performing their duties is actually creating a negative reaction in the form of karma. So like Arjuna, again, abandoning his duty, he'll get bad karma. Inaction, when a person is expected to act, results in consequences. So in the spiritual context, this shows that a failure to act responsibly is still an action because it produces karmic reactions, which can lead to entanglement in the world, right? Like if a police officer is mute at the crime scene, they're expected to do something because it's their responsibility. Not shooting is incriminating, right? So even though he's not physically doing anything, the lack of action is still creating a reaction because it was his dharmic responsibility to act. So just to kind of recap, the first example, the inaction and action, the first example, the police shooting criminals, is when the action is done without attachment, and thus it's considered inaction in the spiritual sense, despite that there's like an external and outward active deed. And then the opposite, the one we just talked about, action and inaction, that's when the police remained mute. It's when the inaction results in consequences, making it a form of action in the spiritual sense, right? So it's all like relative to your duty and how detached you are and able to work in line with your duty. And if you're abandoning your duty, you're going to get karmic reactions. But if you're acting to your duty, you know, if you're acting in line with your duty, you're not, as long as your motive is selfless. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everyone?
Does this kind of like, it's kind of similar to like the four levels of renunciation
Mm-hmm.
in a way. You know, it's like acting with attachment, you know, causes bondage. Then falsely renouncing causes bondage. But you know, acting with detachment. So yeah, they're probably just, you know, that's what I'm thinking of. That's what's coming to my mind.
Yes. Yes. That's very similar.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect connection there. And it's funny because it reads a little bit confusing, you know, with these different words, the action and inaction and how they translate and how many different meanings the Sanskrit word has. And it makes it kind of confusing. But yeah, ultimately, it's really saying the same thing here. Don't run away from your duties. You're going to get entangled in karma for that. You know, you're going to be entangled in the karmic cycle. You're going to be entangled in this cycle of birth and death. And it says, do your duty, but do it in a mood of selflessness and dedication to God ultimately. And if you don't want to dedicate to God, just something bigger than yourself so that you can make some kind of evolution in your consciousness. Yeah, same concepts. Perfect. Because as we learned in earlier verses as well, every soul is unavoidably active. We are active. It's just like who we are. We can't artificially attempt to not be active. Right? But if we have unengaged senses with an impure mind, well, it'll inevitably lead to fall down. And that's the problem here. So that's why we want to start to make our motivation more of one of selflessness, less ego, more selflessness, making it about something bigger than ourselves. And in that way, we can start to purify our mind. Because evaluating this right wrong action, it's tricky. Because again, it's not just the content of the action itself. It's the content plus the context. Who is doing it? Why are they doing it? What are the consequences of it? Right? And only when this is considered can we decide what is right and wrong. So it's so much trickier than we think. And again, this is why we can't even get into judging others. Because one, we just don't know. And two, the judgment in itself will bind us karmically. So best that we stay in our lane. And we, because it's hard enough even to figure out our own motives for something, right? It's hard enough to figure out our own motives. So we could dedicate all of our energy to that and still not really master it. So better to stay in our lane. Right? So in the context of the battlefield, Krishna is telling Arjuna that it is good to be concerned about how to not get into bondage, but how is he going to address that concern? Right? He's by applying this broader picture of reality. Right? Arjuna doesn't want to fight, right? He's attached to his family members. He's not wanting to fight. But Krishna's telling him that not fighting with his opponents, it'll only give them more power and will cause more havoc that you'll be responsible for because you didn't do your duty, which is to protect society, right? So you need to fight, and by fighting, you won't be bound because that's in line with your dharma, in line with God's will. And just like Leonie said, this is much easier in Arjuna's case because, I mean, in the sense that he has Krishna there telling him what his will is, and we don't necessarily, and that's such a direct, obvious, easy way. And this is why we can't just rely on ourselves, because as we talked about before, we have these four defects, right? We have a tendency to cheat, we fall under illusion, we make mistakes, and what's the fourth one? It's escaping me right now. Someone can remember the fourth one, shout it out.
Is it
But
lying,
anyway, what line? Is it lying?
or is that
Did I
the
say that?
cheating?
Isn't that cheating? I think that's cheating.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, it'll come to me probably in a couple minutes. But so we can't just rely on ourselves. So we have to rely on this higher, this guru, sadhu, sastra, and to help kind of figure out where we are and where we aren't, so that we can evolve. Right? Because one who sees beyond our actions to the broader context is wise. And sometimes we're so entangled in our own stories, in our own things, in our own emotions, right? That we can't quite see that. So we need this to help us. But this person will be able to choose what action is to be done and what is not to be done. And that person won't be bound by various kinds of actions. So if we really want this, if this is what we really want and we're committed to this, then this is what we have to do. You know, we have to get really sincere about what we're doing, why we're doing it. And we have to seek powers outside of ourselves for help with this. Trusted sources, you know, not just anybody. And people that we trust have our interests at best heart, or have our interests at, is that how you say it? Have our interest at heart. And people that have walked this before and kind of know, because oftentimes we think we're so different, right? We think that like, oh, I'm the only one that experiences this, or, you know, but you're not. Most of the time, these things, they're shared experiences that we've all either dealt with, or we've been close to people that have, and guaranteed whatever you're thinking or whatever you're going through, many more people than you know are kind of in the same place. The difference can be how sincere we are to upgrade ourselves, right? That's kind of where the fork in the road is, you know? So another example to this kind of like, you know, trying to decipher right or wrong. If it's like a boss has to fire someone who's incompetent, right? Typically, you can look at it and say firing is cruel, you know, or harsh. You don't want to fire someone. But if the firing keeps the business alive and keeps other employees employed, then it's actually good. Right? So we can't just decide what's good or bad based on how it looks, or based on like one zoomed in vantage point. The other thing here is that karma, it's not something mystical, right? It's not like it's a basic principle of accountability. It's logical. It's based on the principle of seeing the big picture and trying to understand things in their context. So for us, it's practical application. In our daily lives, it means performing your duties, right? Your work, your family responsibilities, right? Perform your duties and try your hardest to not be attached to the results, and see where you are attached and where you get tripped up, right? And get back in line. You know, it's an effort, and it's not like, again, you can just flip a light switch and get there. We have to kind of work on it, and we have to get that purification and that realization, and it takes time. But we try to act according to our dharma, what's right, without expecting personal gains from it. This is how we're going to get free from this karmic reaction and this cycle of birth and death. And even if we're faced with a situation where we feel like we can't do anything, recognize that this could still lead to karmic consequences. So it's still important to fulfill your responsibilities, right? You can't just tune out. You can't just ice out and just say, okay, I'm not going to deal with it, right? Because in doing that, you get karmic consequences. So we want to seek to be detached from outcomes and maintain a spiritual mindset, understanding that ultimately it's in God's hand. And a person who understands this and applies these principles is considered transcendental, meaning that they're not attached to the material world or the results of their actions. And they're free from material entanglements, and they see physical action and inaction in the proper spiritual light. So this verse teaches us that true wisdom comes from understanding that selfless action, that action done without personal desire or attachment. And this is what leads to spiritual freedom. Right? While inaction or selfish action leads to entanglement in the material world. Okay, so Krishna has told Arjuna that he can be acting, and even when he's acting, he won't be bound. But how does this happen? And that's what we're going to talk about in this next verse. And this is the last verse we'll do today. Okay, Mariah.
Are we on 18?
19.
Oh, one is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker, for whom the reaction of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge.
Okay, so the point is that Krishna is now saying that a person stays free from bondage. How is their activity yet no reaction, right? That's being elaborated here. Because when a person is doing some activity, what is their motive, right? Is it selfish or is it unselfish? If it's a selfish would be like if that police officer that we were talking about, he was shooting someone just like out of a hate crime, like just because he had some kind of horrendous bias, right? That would be selfish. Unselfish means that the person is acting in the larger interest. He's acting dutifully. Such a person's knowledge such is like fire, and that fire burns away the reactions. And in that way, the person stays free. So let's kind of zoom into that a little bit and talk about exactly what that means, right? Because when we talk about karmic reactions, this is kind of cool. We talk about how they happen, right? So we have a desire, and then because of that desire, we have an action. And because of that action, we get some external karmic reactions. But in addition to that, we get some kind of internal disposition from the fact that we just did that action. And in that maybe reinforces the idea to do the action again. And we're caught in this cycle. Okay, so an example here is like a person who steals, a person who does something like stealing. And one external result is that they'll get caught and they'll get punished. But besides that, they can develop a mindset that maybe he didn't get caught and stealing is okay. And so his disposition to do wrong increases. And that's like the karmic seed. That means that he's likely to do it again. And the same thing happens when we do something good. Our disposition towards that increases, while it gives us good results. Right? So the disposition that we carry produces more and more seeds for the next action. And that's like these little karmic seeds. And the metaphor that's often used is that these karmic seeds will normally fructify. But if we had a seed that is roasted, right, a little seed that's roasted, it won't fructify. So a karmic seed is not fructified if it's roasted by the fire of knowledge, right? If we understand this knowledge, if we can transform our desires to selfless desires, the seeds become roasted and don't grow and produce more seeds. So when a person has the bigger picture and doesn't just act by their own emotions, right? There's no bondage. This is a wise person, and a person that other wise people see this person as wise, right? Ordinary people may not understand, but wise people see that. And we see that all the time too, in our association, So not everybody's going to understand what you're doing or why you're doing it, and that's okay. Right? Important that we do and that we're honest about it. So the previous verse says, don't be driven by own selfish desires, be guided by sense of dutifulness. So Krishna is elaborating here on how one can stay free from bondage by saying that the seeds of our karma don't fructify if we act selflessly. So this transcendental knowledge is knowing that God is the supreme and that we're servants. And therefore, this realization keeps one from desiring things to fulfill our senses. And therefore, one becomes free from material desires. And therefore, his actions produce no reactions. That's how we get to this place of akarma. Does that make sense? What do you guys think of that? That's all that I had for you today. So we can have a little reflection time.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. If I can't tell if, wait a minute, if anyone else's hand is raised, I've been grappling with this conversation since we started the reading today. And what came to mind is a movie from a decade or so ago, The Green Mile with
Yeah.
Tom Hanks. And just to summarize really quickly, there was a gentle giant who committed a crime, and at the end of the movie, he was to be sentenced to death and die, receive the death penalty. And Tom Hanks said to him, "How can I go through with this knowing within my heart that you are absolutely one of God's? Like, I know that you're." And he said to him, the gentle giant, whose name I don't remember, said, "You have to do your duty." And so it would, seem to support very visually what was being said. And what I was grappling with is the notion of karma, or the law of cause and effect, always being in place or immutable, no matter what dimension of being we're in. And I'm not entirely resolved, but I can hear that I had an idea about what effect was, and that if I'm willing to relinquish that to the divine, like Arjuna was being asked to release that whole notion to a prescribed outcome or what you believe would be the result of that, and leave that to Krishna or to the divine, then I can hear it. So I just wanted to share my musing, and to also offer the Green Mile, because it was actually a beautiful depiction of what you described earlier in the reading.
Wow. I've actually never seen that movie, but now I kind of want to.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Oh, thank you for sharing. It's nice. I
Uh,
like it when you guys connect to movies. Mariah did that in the last lecture too. It's cool. It's beautiful to be able to start to see these principles around us, and
mhm.
so
And
nice.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I'm so happy you're back.
Me too.
Mariah, would you like to share anything with us?
Yeah. I want to say thank you for this class. And, the biggest thing that's coming up for me is like, it can be so hard to tell what's right and wrong, you know? It's like, and it really does go down to like the intention that someone is holding. And it's so hard to see someone's intention behind their actions. And, and a lot of times we like to try to like guess what their intention is, or we think we know what that other person's intention is. But yeah, it's like that's why communicating, like asking people, like, what is your intention? Like what do you hope to gain from this? It's so powerful. And sometimes when you ask people, they don't know. And but also like when you do have that, like you personally, when you can align your intention with like surrender to God, then it isn't as important as what is good and bad. Like, I don't know, I'm kind of getting maybe a little out there here, but it's like that's why devotees, they can turn their cheek. They can give people the benefit of the doubt. They can be so compassionate because they don't worry about what that other person's intention is or isn't. They all see it as God's will. So when we can really align with God's will, it's like we don't have to judge what's good or bad, and we can be compassionate. We can turn that other cheek in a sense, but not to say that we should like be naive and like let people walk all over us either. It's like we don't pretend to be more advanced than we are, of course. But um yeah, this class is just really like intention is everything, and it does get confusing, especially if sometimes we're following people or people try and tell us to do something. It's like just have that conversation. What's your intention? Like, do you like tell me why, for Leonie, it's like, tell me why you think this is what Krishna would want, give me your reasoning behind it so I can better understand your intention. And then I can decide if that really aligns with like my understanding, or maybe it corrects my understanding. It's like things can get so confusing, especially in today's day and age. It's like try and just ask for clarity, ask people what is their intention. Like that's a huge thing. And that's something I want to start implementing more. But
Hmm.
so yeah.
So nice. And try to associate with people that you feel like have similar intentions that you do. And so that in that way you can help each other stay accountable and clear on it. And I liked what you said too about how it can transform your relationships with devotees. Like I have some relationships with some devotees that I think so much of because they do so much service for Krishna. Like I see that. I see how much service they do for God. Personally, my relationship with them is maybe a little bit rocky. Maybe we don't really see eye to eye on the way that work should be done or, respecting each other's boundaries or whatever. Personally, it's a little bit rocky. And so I handle that by maybe saying, okay, I maybe won't be involved with them to so much capacity. But my opinion of them is that is so high because they do so much service for God. But personally, I so much don't want to be so entangled with them. So there's almost like creates like multi levels here, but keeping your eye on, what's actually important is the service to God. And that's really what determines your, even opinion of a person. It kind of changes your rhetoric. It's not just so much about like my ego and how it affects me. It's bigger than that. But that doesn't mean, to your point, that you get super entangled. You still have to kind of have some level of self-preservation.
And yeah, just understanding like our own personality types and what we jive with or don't jive with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
But still being able to respect them for the work and the service they do for God. I totally understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Does anybody else want to share? Any other shares? I love hearing from you guys, so I'm like giving it a good minute to see if anybody else wants to share. Okay, if nobody else wants to share, yeah, they're only a reflection of us. Yeah. If anybody else wants to share, or sorry, we will be done here then. Oh, Maria, are you taking yourself off mute? I love hearing from Maria. No, you're not. You're just saying thank you. Okay. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you then on Thursday.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye for now.